Welcome to the Horror Hive channel, where the darkness and unknown come alive. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an episode of terror. Let's dive into the darkness together.
Night terrors. It was a typical Friday evening at Easton University, and the students were eager to let loose and have some fun after a long week of classes. However, for a group of students, the night would take a terrifying turn. As they made their way to a nearby frat party, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of their necks stood up as they heard footsteps following them, but when they turned around, no one was there. They shrugged it off, attributing it to the excitement of the night, but the feeling of unease lingered. Once they arrived at the party, they quickly forgot about the strange sensations and got lost in the music and laughter. But as the night went on, the group started to notice that some of their friends were missing. They searched the house, but they were nowhere to be found. Just as they were about to leave and call the police, they heard a scream coming from the basement. They hesitantly made their way down the stairs, fear gripping their hearts. When they reached the bottom, they were met with a sight that they would never forget. The basement was covered in blood, and the missing students were lying motionless on the floor. The group was horrified and tried to run, but the door was locked from the outside. The only sound that filled the room was a sinister laughter coming from the shadows. As the night wore on, the group of students felt their hopes slowly draining away. The knowledge that they were trapped with a deranged serial killer only added to the growing sense of terror that was consuming them. Despite their efforts to find a way out, the exits seemed to have been sealed off, trapping them inside with their tormentor. The once united group started to turn on each other, fear and paranoia driving them to make desperate decisions. The air was thick with the scent of fear and desperation, and the once sturdy walls seemed to close in around them, trapping them in their own personal nightmare. The darkness was filled with the sounds of their screams and the murderer's sinister laughter as he picked off his victims one by one. As the night drew to a close, only a few students were left, huddled in a corner, clutching each other in terror. They knew that their fate was sealed, and that they would soon join the others in death. The thought of never seeing their families again was a cruel blow, and they braced themselves for the final moments of their lives. The last thing they heard was the sound of the murderer's footsteps, growing louder and louder until it was upon them. And then there was only silence. Police arrived and broke down the door. However, it was too late. The students were gone, and the basement was empty, except for the haunting echoes of the killer's laughter. Years later, the Easton University massacre became a legend, a cautionary tale that was passed down from generation to generation. The mystery of what happened that night remained unsolved, and the students were never found. The town was left to wonder about the horrors that had taken place within the walls of that frat house, and the chilling echoes of the killer's laughter continued to haunt the minds of those who had survived. Killer from Willow Creek. As the sun began to set over the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, fear began to grip the residents. For the past few weeks, there had been a series of brutal murders, each more gruesome than the last. The local authorities were at a loss, with no leads and no suspects. The townspeople were on edge, and many were afraid to leave their homes after dark. One night, a young woman named Sarah was walking home from a late shift at the diner. She was just a few blocks from her house when she heard footsteps behind her. She quickened her pace, but the footsteps grew louder, getting closer and closer. She started to run, but suddenly a hand reached out and grabbed her, pulling her into the shadows. She woke up hours later, tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse. The room was dimly lit, and she could just make out the figure of a man, dressed in all black, standing in front of her. The man was tall and thin, with a menacing scowl on his face. Sarah struggled against her bonds, but it was no use. She was at the mercy of the Willow Creek serial killer. The man began to pace back and forth, talking to himself in a low, guttural voice. He seemed to be enjoying himself, relishing in the power he held over his victim. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest, and she could feel the sweat beading on her forehead. Suddenly, the man turned to her, a sick smile spreading across his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a large, rusty knife. Sarah screamed, but her captor just laughed, slowly advancing towards her. Sarah screamed for help, but her voice was lost in the deafening silence of the warehouse. The figure approached her with a sinister smile, and she realized with a growing sense of terror that the reign of terror was far from over. The man lunged at her, but she managed to wriggle free and run towards the door. As she stumbled out into the night, she could hear the sound of footsteps coming after her. She didn't dare look back and ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. She stumbled through the dark streets of Willow Creek, the sound of footsteps growing closer with every passing moment. She could feel the presence of the killer right behind her, and she knew that she was running for her life. Just when she thought she couldn't run anymore, she saw the flashing lights of a police car in the distance. She sprinted towards it, but just as she was about to reach safety, she tripped and fell to the ground. The killer was upon her, his hand closing around her throat. But just as he was about to strike, a shot rang out, and the killer fell to the ground. The police had finally arrived, and Sarah was safe. But the memory of the Willow Creek serial killer lived on, a haunting presence that would follow Sarah for the rest of her life. Every time she heard a strange noise, she would look over her shoulder, wondering if the killer had returned. She never felt completely safe again, and the fear of that night stayed with her, a constant reminder of the evil that still lurked in the shadows. The hunter's prey. The small town of Blackwood was on edge, as a string of gruesome murders had been committed in the area over the past few months. Bodies of young women were being found in the nearby woods, each one brutally murdered and mutilated beyond recognition. The local police were at a loss, and the residents were living in fear. For recent college graduate Lily, the murders hit close to home. She had grown up in Blackwood and had many friends and family still living there. She was determined to help in any way she could, and she joined the search party to find the killer. As the search party made their way into the woods, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She felt as if someone was following them, lurking in the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the musty smell of age. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, and the thumping of her own heart. Suddenly, they came upon a clearing, and in the center of it, they saw a figure standing over a freshly dug grave. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in all black, and holding a large knife. Before they could react, the figure turned towards them, revealing a mask that covered its face. The mask was made to resemble a human face, but with grotesque features that were twisted and distorted. The eyes were black, void of all emotion, and the mouth was open in a silent scream. Lily's heart raced as the figure stepped forward, the knife raised in its hand. The group tried to back away, but the figure was too quick, closing in on them with lightning speed. Panic set in as the reality of their situation hit them. They were face to face with a serial killer. As the figure moved closer, Lily noticed that the freshly dug grave was not the only one. In fact, there were dozens of graves scattered throughout the clearing, each with a small wooden cross marking its place. The sight was too much to bear, and Lily let out a scream, only to be silenced by the figure's hand clamped firmly over her mouth. The figure whispered in a voice that was low and raspy,
"Welcome to my world, where death is the only escape."
The group was frozen in terror, unable to move or even speak. The figure continued,
"I've been waiting for you, for someone new to add to my collection."
The group realized too late that they were not the first to enter the clearing, and that they were not going to be the last. The serial killer had claimed this place as his own. The shadow of the serial killer loomed over them, a constant reminder that they would never be safe again.
We hope you enjoyed our journey into the world of horror. We strive to bring you the best in horror entertainment, and we appreciate your support. Remember to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of terror. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in our next story.